All right, it's 4:30. We ready to start? Good. Good afternoon. I'm Ben Carswell, Director of Conservation for the JEKYLL Island Authority. And this afternoon, we're here for a public session to present the draft updates to the JEKYLL Island Conservation Plan. And we have Jay Exum of Exum Associates here with us. Jay was involved, was the architect of the 2011 conservation plan, which we are updating, and was a great fit to bring back to help guide the public input and edits to the update. Because this was such a well-prepared document back in 2011 with a lot of extensive public input that went into it at that time, we felt good about not going back to a blank slate, not reinventing the wheel. We've got a good plan with, going on 10 years old. It did need some updates, but again, an update, not a total rewrite or reboot. Jay has extensive experience in the consulting sector, working with large conservation properties throughout the Southeast, doing ecological evaluations, working with local governments on plans just like this, and we really appreciate his help with this plan. Again, this is a combined in-person session with the availability of remote viewing. So some folks are watching via our YouTube channel. If you are viewing this remotely, you can go to jekyllisland.com/conservation-plan. And there you can download the Conservation Plan 2020 draft. And for the first 30 minutes of this presentation, if you have a question, you'll be able to submit that. So click Submit Public Comment or Question, and that will take you to another page. You scroll down to where it says Have a Question, and you enter your question there. Beyond just questions, public comment is open and available starting last Friday and extending through at least November 5th. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Exum.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to the people in the room and to the people online that have interest in the conservation plan. I want to say from the beginning that after we drafted the plan in 2011, Jones hired Ben Carswell as the director of conservation almost immediately after the plan, which was recommended in the 2011 plan. And they began using that plan as a guide, almost unlike any of the other plans that I have developed over the last 30 years. So I view this plan as a living, breathing document that I think is going to be used just as extensively as the 2011 plan was. So we take it kind of seriously, and I believe it's going to be an asset to the island when it's implemented. So why do this update? First of all, it was described in the plan in 2011 that it needed to be updated every 5 or 8 or 10 years, and here we are. By the time that plan was developed in 2012, and by the time we began the process of reviewing it late last year, it was about 8 years in the process. Also, personnel additions. Ben was not employed by the JEKYLL Island Authority in 2011. Since that time, he has hired, I think, 4 full-time staff with part-time staff that total up to 10 people that Ben has to use and access to meet the objectives of the 2011 plan. And in that sense, many of the objectives that we laid out in 2011 have either been accomplished or they've moved to another phase. So we need to think about what are the next challenges for each of those. And with that, the new data and experience obtained by JIA staff may or have caused us to modify some of the objectives in the plan And those are taken into account in this update. It allows introspection also on these accomplishments that have made since 2011. What went right? What went wrong? Where should we focus our time? And how does that lead us to having maybe a more focused plan in 2020? And then finally, there's new problems that we envisioned in 2011, like climate change, sea level rise, invasive exotic species. But there's new information on each of those, as well as other evolving influences on the natural resources in Jekyll Island, and we needed to address those in this plan. The process. We identified two stakeholder groups, one technical group, and I'll talk about both of these in a minute, one advisory stakeholder group, and we got input from them back in March. In fact, this meeting we had with the technical advisory group was the last thing done in person on this project. Everything else until today has been done electronically via Zoom. That meeting was on March the 12th. The advisory stakeholder group was in April, and it was done via Zoom. And the other meetings that we have had with respect to the plan have been done via Zoom as well. So after those initial meetings, we made literally hundreds of edits that were maybe wordsmithing, maybe changing the phasing and changing the objectives that I talked about earlier, where certain tasks have moved on to the next phase. Those things came relatively easy and didn't require an extensive review by others. Even though those have all been reviewed by the advisory groups as well. But in addition, we added some new sections and chapters in the book and in the plan. And I'm going to go over the majority of those today, but those new revisions came about because of changes in science and this new introspection with the Conservation Department. So, after we added made the edits and added those chapters, the plan was reviewed by senior JIA staff. And after those incorporations were made, and about the 8th draft, I think, we have made it available to the public in the last few days. And we presented basically that concept to the JIA, the Jekyll Island Authority Board, this morning. Now is the presentation to the public, again, some virtual and some here in person. And we're going to have a public comment period after that. Ben already mentioned it. It started last Friday, goes through November 5th, at which time we will finalize the update to the plan and come back before the board. So that's the process. I mentioned these focus groups, and there were two stakeholder focus groups, one technical and one advisory. If you look at the entities on the left, and you see Nature Conservancy, University of Georgia, University of Florida, Fish and Wildlife Service, you'll note that the expertise on coastal ecology, wildlife research, marine ecology, natural resource planning for barrier islands, those were the people on the technical side that gave us input on the technical aspects of the plan that needed to be reevaluated. On the other side are the advisory groups with a little more local focus, Jekyll Island, Glynn County, coastal Georgia, and probably more in touch with the environmental groups represented on Jekyll Island or in the regional vicinity. And these represent advocacy groups that I think that probably represent many of the people on Jekyll Island. So both of those focus groups provided input during the process and have now gotten copies of the plan to provide input on this draft of the plan. I alluded to this a minute ago, but there have been a lot of accomplishments since 2011, and they hit the ground running using that 2011 conservation plan as a guide. So now on the island, and you've probably all seen it, there's prescribed fire that's being implemented. There's a ranger program that helps educate the public and guests on Jekyll Island. There's unique wildlife research that's ongoing that provides invaluable information about how to manage natural resources on Jekyll Island. And there's lots of partnerships that have provided sort of leverage to what the department staff can do. Other things that have been accomplished by the team so far, There is restoration that's gone on for dunes and coastal marshes. There have been guidance provided by the Department on development projects to implement green stormwater. There is wildlife rescue for things like this gator with the hook in his mouth. And Conservation Department staff have been the project managers for major projects like the beach revetment project shown on the right-hand side of this slide. So all in all, I think they've been an invaluable component to not only the conservation of natural resources, but also the Jekyll Island team. We took a look at the mission statement and edited a little bit of the first part of this text that is not in bold, and changed a few words, but really what was the radical change was what's in bold on this slide was added to the mission statement. And it's this concept of letting the conservation plan guide the Jekyll Island Authority, its partners and its tenants to reduce the broader environmental footprint of human activities that occur within the park. The notion that the Jekyll Island Authority, whose mission already is to have Jekyll Island be a unique place and to take responsibility and leadership for this broader environmental footprint. That's embedded in the conservation plan mission statement, at least in this draft. So I mentioned this earlier, we added either significant text to or new chapters for 5 different things. And these are probably the most significant modifications of the plan. We added guidance throughout the document, probably 30 or 40, 50 places, but also a new section related to climate change and sea level rise. We added a section on JIA's role to reduce emissions, waste, and water use. We updated the EAP, the Environmental Assessment Procedure, review of projects with potential to impact natural systems. We modified the map of special protection areas, and we refocused the chapter on environmental education. So those 5 things were the most substantive part of the text, and I want to go over each of the 5 and give you a brief summary of how they've been included in the plan. First, with respect to climate considerations, we think what we did in this plan was essentially the recognition of advances in scientific knowledge related to climate change and sea level rise that other entities, scientific organizations, state, federal, local, even the other master plans that Jekyll Island have already taken into consideration. And we kind of went from the conceptual that was in 2011 to more specific recommendations in the 2020 plan. These are now in line with, consistent with state and federal agencies. And what we did was to create a new park-wide management objective to assure adaptation and resiliency to these climate change and sea level rise. And what we think this probably has done is to get us in sync, first with the State Wildlife Action Plan. This was sort of used as the template for the way in which the plan was modified with respect to climate change, sea level rise. It's also consistent with the climate adaptation strategy at the federal level. It's consistent with what other coastal barrier islands have done with respect to sea level rise planning. And it's consistent with what has been done in the master plan and the Jekyll Island carrying capacity and infrastructure work that have been conducted over the last 5 or 6 years. So we think we're upgrading what has been recognized at local, state, and federal level as sort of the requirement for particularly coastal communities to pay a lot of attention to. There's also a new chapter on institutional sustainability, and it focuses on 3 main objectives. Energy, with the objective to enhance energy efficiency and expand use of renewables. Material waste reduction, focused on optimizing recycling and reuse and limiting waste consumption in general. And water conservation, with an objective to reduce at least deep aquifer withdrawal and enhance water use efficiency. This notion of institutional sustainability, meaning something that's led by the entity, by JIA, began a number of years ago, more than 10, because this convention center is a LEED Silver certified building. And there are other examples across Jekyll Island of where this sustainability has begun, and we tried to make it a little more comprehensive in its approach. Other examples on the island include the public-private partnership model, where the solar fields were constructed on an old capped landfill back in 2019, generates 1 megawatt of energy, about the same amount comparable to the energy used by 100 homes. One of the other sections that was worthy of a relatively significant editing, again, not a rewrite, all these things were mentioned in the original text, but there were some additions that were warranted, is the environmental assessment procedure, along with what were called special protection areas in the original draft. And just to remind you of sort of the context for the EAP, proposed projects that have significant potential to degrade natural systems have to undergo an EAP review. And the EAP functions in coordination with the Jekyll Island Master Plan and the Jekyll Island Design Guidelines. And it has a core review team that consists of Jekyll Island staff members and 4 individuals outside of JIA. And those 4 individuals, excuse me, those 4 individuals include 2 people with expertise in the particular kind of project that's proposed, and 2 other individuals that would be appointed by the executive director. And this comes in part because of recommendations from both the technical stakeholder and the advisory stakeholder group that they wanted more influence from the outside. So these have been added to the EAP process. One other thing that's a substantial change from what was the original EAP process was a better definition and a clearer illustration of special protection areas. These were envisioned in 2011, and there was a map in that original conservation plan, but they are the island's most valuable natural assets. And the objective here is to direct development away from, future development away from these special protection areas, and to limit environmental impacts to virtually zero, almost negligible in the areas that are SPAs. Since the EAP has been in place since the 2011 plan, 19 projects have undergone review, and some of them have had relatively significant change, either in design or conservation. For example, almost all of them undergo some sort of review of how to better treat stormwater at its source, including pervious paving and native landscaping. One project has a legally protected wildlife corridor through a planned development. Camp Jekyll has a row of live oak trees that were not included in the original plan, and that's in the top left of these slides. And these were included as negotiated, I would say, as a part of the EAP process. Trash compactors have replaced dumpsters at almost every commercial location across the island. Again, more of these swales to locally affect stormwater to, again, control it at its source occur across almost all new development in the last 10 years. And special protection to areas beyond the primary dune, like is shown on the graphic on the right-hand side, where from the Marriott Hotel that's under construction down to the Hampton, these hotel facilities are all moved back further than what they would have been without this internal review. I mentioned the greater focus on special protection areas. I know this graphic on the left side has got a lot going on, but it's there to show you that the special protection areas, in part, we wanted to show that all of the coastal marshes, which is the dominant feature on this graphic, are protected. So everything, even off of the island itself, are shown as special protection areas, along with wetlands, coastal and freshwater both. And There is a new level of protection given to the maritime oak forest across the island, and they have been added to the special protection areas. One other category that we think is important is the naturally vegetated land between what is mapped as beach and leased parcels. And this is one area where that's of particular importance. So these beachfront prairies, as we've called them, they are currently, this one in particular is currently undisturbed by development, and that's the objective long term, is for this to be protected from any incursions in the future. We refocused the chapter on environmental education and tried to blend with that the objectives for outdoor recreation. In the 2011 plan, we talked a lot about the things that were going on with other entities outside of JIA, things that we couldn't control, and we kind of condensed those to say that we want to pursue opportunities, partnerships that increase opportunities for lower income, minority, and individuals of all abilities, and assess how the JIA can be involved with that initiative. We also want to plan for generational change in recreation activities. We know that Gen X, Gen Y, millennials have their own thoughts about what they want to achieve from outdoor recreation, and we want to be at the forefront of that. So it's an objective in the plan to try to broaden the market with the younger generation, see what's needed now and in the longer term for them in terms of perhaps technology or experience or how they want to be exposed to environmental education. We also want to focus on, when we expand outdoor recreation, we want it to be in places that relieve the pressure on the roads, beaches, and bike paths. So that may include trying to focus outdoor recreation in the interior of the island, delicately, appropriately, but how can we do that so that it's not just more people on roads, beaches, and bike paths? And we want to focus on environmental education with the outdoor recreation and believe there's a demand for that for people that come to Jekyll Island. So that's a lot to go over, and I didn't spend a lot of time on all the edits in the plan. And I will tell you that the plan is even in 2011, it was a substantial document. This plan is almost 100 pages in length. We would encourage you to read it and read all of it, but there also may be sections of the plan that are of specific interest to you. And if so, and you want to go and read the chapter on institutional sustainability and give us comments on that, then that's great. Or if you would like to comment on outdoor recreation and your experiences, that's great as well. So we've got lots of time for public input here, and to remind everybody that are watching this live, we're going to take questions that you would submit until, and Ben, I'm going to lean on you for a second. I think we're going to take questions until 5 o'clock. And we may have input from y'all now, but we're going to take questions from those online until 5, take a little bit of a break so we can gather the questions, and then we're going to try to answer those questions and perhaps any questions that y'all may have asked that we need to discuss between 5 and 6. So I think now we would like to open it up to public comment from those of you in the room, if anyone has any comments that you would like to make. And let me remind everybody that you have this document live, or you have this document now available to you, and you see the website here, and you've got until November 5th to provide comments as extensively as you want to, or on something specific. So we'd love to have any feedback on the document. With that, is there anybody here that would like to comment, ask questions, or give us direction? Please.
4 or 5 minutes before the 5 o'clock deadline for them, and I didn't want to be running over into that.
Come on up to the mic and say your name if you would, please.
I'm Al Tate. I'm an ecologist here on the island, retired from teaching position. And I've read the document. My first question is that throughout the document, you refer to appendices, but I don't find them.
I think the appendices are available now. Ben, I'm posing this
They
question.
weren't available as of 3 o'clock this afternoon.
Oh,
online.
okay.
That's correct, Al. That some of the appendices are still in prep.
Okay, so when will we be able to see them before the deadline of November the 5th?
We will evaluate that question and let everyone know. So the issue is some of the appendices are complete and some of them are documents from studies that we have not received yet, and I'm not sure exactly the timeline that we will receive them, so I can't commit to a specific
Well, could you just
date.
post the ones you got?
We'll look into that. That's a good question.
All right.
And listen, thank you for reading all the documents and wanting to see the appendices.
Well, I have a great interest. You may or may not remember that Steve Newell and I were reviewers on the original
Yes.
document.
Yes.
I kind of regret not being offered that opportunity on this one, but I plan to give you a review anyway, so
Please.
it won't matter about that. But the thing that that I also wanted to make sure got in the record here is that this document is clear evidence that here on JEKYLL, we have moved from a passive, praise and leave it alone approach to the natural environment into an active management program with the hiring of Ben and a staff. And that's a great step forward, because if we're going to maintain this 65-35 thing, we're going to have active and management and resource, active taking care of it to be able to do that. As a general principle, you as an ecologist will know that the natural environment, when left alone, has a tendency to restore and improve itself and become more interesting, more diverse, more complex over time, as opposed to the developed environment, which tends to degrade itself over time, and hence you have to go in and spend a lot of money refurbishing, restoring, and tearing it down. And if we recognize the great value of not having to pay for the improvements of the natural environment, but rather just look at trying to improve and maintain them, then I think JEKYLL Island will be able to maintain itself adequately over this 50-year long-term view that you were supporting there. The thing that I think is a glaring oversight since the original document came out with recommendations and so forth is that I feel like that while we have hired environmental staff, there is still no dedicated budget for conserving our natural environments here on the island. And until we have a dedicated budget, then all of these wonderful things you propose here are going to get limited by necessity in how much implementation we can achieve. So I would urge that to be a priority in trying to get this implemented. There's an awful lot of things in here. Another thing I wanted to say was that in order to try to establish accountability for all of these rather ambitious programs that we have, I think it would be appropriate to include in here either something like a biannual review of progress to help accountability for how we're achieving the goals that we have here. And it's like writing your own goals down. If you just write them down and go off and leave them, they don't get done. So I'm hoping that we can have some systematic method of reviewing and sort of upgrading or modifying the environmental plans for the conservation plan on the environment as we go along. I have several other comments, but I'm going to limit that to my written review. But I have one that I would call your attention to because it's one, I was out looking at the Clam Creek Marsh yesterday at high tide, and I see a problem out there that I don't think anybody has thought about. The hydrology of the interior part of the island, of course, is really important for maintaining the productivity of these interior marshes. They're all nourished by tidal inflow. And of course, you have adequately mentioned the restrictions that have been in place, and we've known for a long time about the lack of, or the constrictions to tidal nourishment of the interior marsh through the culverts and the like. Well, we now have, as a result of the hurricane coming in and breaching the marsh there at Driftwood Beach, we now have the tide coming in and out of that. And at high tide, yesterday, for example, the Clam Creek bike trail and much of the area there was inundated by the high tide, and all of that water coming in from the Atlantic Ocean, being pushed by the strong winds and stuff, was coming in and including increasing the erosion of that ditch. It's where the bike trail bridges are, that blew out when you know what I'm talking about. Well, it occurred to me that while several people online were talking about, well, okay, if we get a tidal creek entranceway from the Atlantic there, that won't be so bad. It'll isolate the little JEKYLL Island up there and keep people from going up there messing with it. It'll be a better natural area. And that's one way to look at it. But there's another way that I don't think people have thought about, and that is, if you drove along Beachview Drive there and looked where the culvert goes under Beachview from the Clam Creek Marsh, you will see that the hydraulic head on the Clam Creek side was about 3 feet over the top of that culvert going into the interior marsh on the south side of Beachview. Now, that in and of itself has been going on a while and is not necessarily going to make much of a change. But if that tidal creek cuts through, going back into the Atlantic Ocean, then that gives the water in the Clam Creek Marsh a shorter trajectory, and it will go on out, and it will reduce the nourishment of that interior wetland on the south side of Beachview Drive. So I think that in general, the nourishment of these interior marshes is a serious problem, and a catastrophic event like that, I don't really know what will happen if that tidal creek gets cut deep enough that it drains out to the Atlantic Ocean before adequate water nourishment gets into that beach. But it's something that needs looking at, and it needs looking at pretty soon if we're going to avoid difficulty from there. That's a specific thing that sort of is an added addition to that. But anyway, I want to say thank you for all the energy and efforts that the conservation staff and you have put into this document, and I hope that we'll see a lot of good come from it. And certainly I'm glad to see it, and I applaud your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Thanks for all those comments too. Insightful and appreciated. Any other comments from those in the room? Well, thank you everybody for being here. And you're welcome to stay. We're going to take a 5 or 10 minute break just to collate the comments from the
I think, Jay, I think we can skip the break because we only have one question that's been submitted.
We have questions from two different sources, though. Are you looking at both?
We have a question and we have a comment that was submitted through the questions portal.
Okay.
So if you'd like, I can go ahead and
let's do it.
read the question.
Please.
The question was posed by Beverly Hopkins. She says, I am trying to digest the special protection areas. I really think the whole island should be that. I see that it mentions rejecting a project if it impacts SPA, meaning special protection area. If JIA, a leaseholder, developer, or other party actively does something impacting an SPA, what kind of enforcement does the SPA/conservation plan offer to really protect those areas?
Okay, I'll give a shot at this question, and Ben, you may also have some comments afterwards. And I did see this comment that came in before we began. So I think the question is a well-founded question, and it is one of the reasons why we added specificity in the plan to the special protection areas. So to me, there's two objectives to these special protection areas. One is proactive, so that everybody knows that the importance of these special protection areas is so great that you shouldn't, under almost any circumstance, propose to develop in these areas. And the second is if it is deemed that the project, some project can't move forward without impacting the special protection area, there's I'm going to call it reactive, but it's a procedural aspect. You have to go through the EAP review. So to me, there's a proactive side that says we're defining them now and asking everybody to recognize there should be this shared perspective about SPAs being important. And then the second part of that is you got to go through an EAP and justify why you would propose any impacts to SPAs. And the process that we've gone through has added a better definition for a more explicit direction for how that's reviewed in the EAP process. And to me, it should limit ever having substantial impacts to SPAs.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, I appreciate you emphasizing that what's a very important part of this draft is a clear definition of special protection area, and that's something we don't have in the current plan. And I encourage everybody to read over that for themselves, because it really does use fairly strong language that these are the most important natural areas on Jekyll Island, and that should not be taken lightly. Beyond that, it does depend on the specific situation. Some of the SPAs carry their own state and federal protection. For example, well, of course, we know coastal salt marsh is protected under the State Shore Protection Act, and certain freshwater wetlands are protected under the Federal Clean Water Act. There are others that do not have those additional protections, and in those cases we have to look at, well, is this area classified as undeveloped land? Is it classified as developed land, and maybe it should be classified as undeveloped? Should we identify other mechanisms that should be brought in on top of the special protection area to protect these? And those are different answers depending on the specific case, but I can say that we're having high-level discussions with the authority about those questions.
And just one more comment on the special protection areas, and this is highlighted in the plan as well. One of the objectives is to internalize some of the outdoor recreation, and that could include in the maritime oak forest, which is now one of the SPAs. So even that objective, which we think overall may have some value to the plan, is recreation in an area that is globally rare and unique, and it's got this fantastic opportunity for environmental education, and it keeps people off of roads, bikeways, and beaches. So there may be value to that, but even that process for perhaps trails through the maritime oak forest would require an EAP review.
Correct.
So any other comments or questions that need to be addressed, Ben?
I think we've covered it. If no one in the audience, yes, sir.
Craig Patterson on the Jekyll Island Citizens Association Board. One of the areas, looking at the EAP procedure, or the procedure itself, would a resident start seeing impact if they wanted to put a garage on their lot? Would we kick back to EAP secondary from just a building permit?
I'll turn that over to Ben. Yeah.
Thanks. Good question. I would think that would be very very unlikely, and for the scenario you described, no. We've have not since the EAP was instituted in 2012 applied the process to a residential project. That's not something we would take lightly in any sort of, run-of-the-mill residential, remodeling or landscape improvement. We would not, I wouldn't want to take it completely off the table. There's a few situations on the island where there might be a lot that's sitting vacant that's not built on, for example, that's near a wetland, where, depending on what somebody might propose to build there, it could be important to have the ability to use the EAP. So I wouldn't want to tie our hands if something unusual came up, but in 99% of cases like the one you described, the EAP is not the appropriate process.
So how would if we went and sought a building permit, would the person in charge of building permits maybe take a look at that and then advise that it be kicked back to EAP?
No, I don't believe so. I do also serve on the design review group, and so I interface with that process as well.
Okay.
But as I said, I don't anticipate that it would be an exception where we might call for where I might recommend to the executive director that we apply the EAP to a residential project, and I haven't had reason to do that in the past 8 years, and I don't see anything particular on the horizon that would call for that.
Yeah, I was just checking to see if there was a chance that a resident could go afoul of a new ordinance or recommendation, and they get 3/4 of the way down on their project, and all of a sudden they find out, oh, you never followed the procedure for an environmental assessment.
I think that's pretty unlikely to ever occur.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from those in the room? Okay. Well, thank you for coming today, and thank you for participating online. Just to reiterate, you've got until November 5th to look at the document and or provide comments that you think we may have omitted from the document needs to be there. We look forward to any and all edits and comments and thoughts, and we appreciate you being here today. And with that, Jones, I don't know if you have any comments before we adjourn the YouTube session, but
thank you, Jay. And I guess the last thing is I would remind folks that the recording of this meeting through the YouTube channel will continue to be available as folks review the plan. If you want to refer back to this for pointers about what some of the key changes were, that is a resource that's available. So thank you all for coming out. Thank you all for listening in online, and we appreciate everyone's attention and support. Thank you.